The moment your heart stops being yours, it already belongs to something else. The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, soaking through Clara Hayes's thin jacket as she hurried down the empty alley, her sneakers splashing through shallow puddles that reflected flickering neon lights. It had been a double shift, 12 hours on her feet, and all she wanted was to get home, lock the door, and pretend tomorrow might be easier. But then she saw him, a man lying against the brick wall like he had simply been placed there and forgotten. Too still, too perfect, his dark coat untouched by the grime around him, his skin pale. Too pale, even under the dim glow of a broken street lamp. Clara slowed, her breath catching, every instinct telling her to keep walking, to mind her own business like everyone else in this city did. But she didn't. She never did. "Hey," she called softly, stepping closer, her voice barely louder than the rain. "Are you okay?" No response, no movement, just silence that felt heavier than it should. She knelt beside him, her knees pressing into cold concrete, her fingers trembling as she reached toward his neck the way she remembered from a basic first aid class she once took and never thought she'd use. Nothing, no pulse, her stomach dropped. "No, no, no," she whispered, panic rising sharp and fast. He couldn't be gone. Not like this. Not alone in an alley no one cared about. She shifted, pressing her palm flat against his chest, desperate, as if she could force life back into him through sheer will. And that's when she felt it. Nothing, not even the faintest echo of a heartbeat. Just cold, unnatural stillness, colder than the rain, colder than the night, colder than anything she had ever touched. Her breath hitched, her mind racing. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. "Stay with me," she said under her breath, leaning closer, her voice shaking. "Please, just stay." And then it happened, a single, heavy thump beneath her hand, so sudden it made her flinch, her eyes widening. What? Another thump followed, stronger, deeper, but wrong. The rhythm didn't match a human heartbeat. It didn't follow any pattern she knew. It felt like it was searching, adjusting, sinking. Clara froze as a sharp pain lanced through her own chest, her heart skipping, stuttering, and then aligning with his. Beat 4. Beat, as if something invisible had reached inside her and rewired her from the inside out. She gasped, pulling back slightly but unable to break contact, her palm still pressed against him like it was locked there, her pulse no longer hers alone. And then his eyes opened, slowly, deliberately, revealing a color that did not belong to any living person, deep crimson with a faint glow beneath the surface, ancient, aware, and focused entirely on her. Clara's breath caught in her throat, every instinct screaming danger now. Too late. Far too late. Because whatever she had just done, it had already begun, and the man beneath her was no longer just a stranger in the rain. He was something else entirely, something powerful, something old. And as his gaze held hers, unblinking, she felt it again. That shared heartbeat, steady now, undeniable, binding them together in a way she didn't understand. A connection that should not exist, could not exist, yet there it was, echoing between them in the silence, as if the night itself had witnessed it and chosen not to interfere. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and confusion, Clara realized one terrifying truth. She hadn't just tried to save him, she had given him something she could never take back. Clara's hand slipped from his chest, but the connection did not break. It lingered, pulsing between them like an invisible thread pulling tighter with every second. She staggered back onto her heels, breath uneven, her fingers pressing instinctively against her own chest, as if she could find her heartbeat there again. But it was different now. Deeper, heavier, echoing with something that did not belong to her. The man rose slowly to his feet with a kind of grace that felt wrong for someone who had just been lying motionless moments ago, his movements smooth, controlled, as if the world itself adjusted around him. His eyes never left hers, not for a single second. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low and calm, but carrying a weight that made the air feel thinner. Clara shook her head, taking another step back, her shoes scraping against wet pavement. "I did not do anything. I was just trying to help." Her voice came out smaller than she expected, swallowed by the rain. He tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was something unfamiliar, something that did not belong in his world. "Humans do not bring back what is already gone," he said quietly, and there was no anger in his tone. Only something colder, something more calculating. Clara's heart stuttered again, and she felt it, the same rhythm answering from him, matching her without hesitation. Her stomach twisted. "Stop," she whispered, pressing her palm harder against her chest. "Why does it feel like this?" His gaze flickered briefly to her hand, then back to her eyes, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softness, not warmth, but recognition, sudden and sharp, like a realization he had not expected. Before he could speak again, the sound of engines cut through the rain, low and controlled, headlights flooding the alley in stark white light. Clara turned instinctively, shielding her eyes as two black vehicles slid to a stop with impossible precision. The doors opened in perfect sync. Figures stepped out, tall, composed, moving with a quiet coordination that made her skin prickle. They were dressed in dark coats that seemed untouched by the storm. Their presence alone changed the air. Colder, heavier. They approached quickly, but not chaotically. Every step measured, every movement intentional. Clara's breath caught as one of them dropped to one knee in front of the man behind her. "Your Majesty." The words landed like a shockwave. Clara turned back, her mind struggling to catch up. Majesty. That was not possible, not real, but the way they bowed, the way they did not question, the way the man she had just touched stood there unmoved by it all. It felt undeniable. The world tilted under her feet. The kneeling figure lifted his gaze just enough to glance at Clara, and his expression changed instantly, from controlled to something dangerously close to alarm. "My lord, she is human," he said carefully, as if choosing each word could change the outcome. Another voice joined, quieter but sharper. "She should not be this close." Clara's pulse spiked, but the echo from the man remained steady, anchoring her in place whether she wanted it or not. "She touched me," the man said simply, his voice cutting through theirs. Silence followed, heavy and immediate. The kneeling figures stiffened, exchanging brief looks that Clara did not understand. "That is not possible," one of them said under his breath. "It is," another replied, his eyes now fixed on Clara with something unreadable, something between fear and disbelief. Clara shook her head, backing away again. "I do not know what is happening. I just tried to help." Her voice trembled, but no one was listening to her anymore. Their focus had shifted entirely. The man stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a single smooth movement. Too fast, too precise. Clara froze as he reached out, not touching her, but hovering just inches away, as if something invisible prevented him from going further. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Your heart," he said, almost to himself. Clara's breath hitched. "What about it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He looked directly at her then, and for the first time there was something unmistakable in his gaze, something that was not control, not power, but uncertainty. "It is not only yours anymore," he said quietly, the words settling into her like a weight she could not shake. Clara felt it again, that shared rhythm, steady, unbreakable, real, and suddenly the rain, the alley, the entire world around her felt distant, like it no longer mattered, because whatever had just happened between them, it had already changed everything, and there was no going back. The silence that followed his words felt heavier than the rain, pressing down on Clara's chest as if the world itself had shifted without asking her permission. She swallowed hard, her fingers still curled against her shirt, feeling that unfamiliar rhythm pulsing beneath her palm, steady and wrong and not entirely hers. "That does not make any sense," she said, shaking her head, trying to ground herself in something normal, something real. "Hearts do not just connect like that." But even as she said it, she knew it was not true anymore, because she could feel him, not physically, not in a way she could explain, but there, present, like a second presence layered over her own existence. The man in front of her watched her closely, as if every change in her expression told him something important, something he needed to understand quickly, before it was too late. One of the men behind him stepped forward slightly, his voice low but urgent. "My lord, this should not continue. The bond is unstable. We need to separate them immediately." Clara's head snapped toward him. "Separate what?" she asked, her voice sharper now, fear turning into something more desperate. The man did not answer her, his attention fixed on the one they had called king. The man's jaw tightened just slightly, the only sign of tension in an otherwise perfectly controlled expression. "You think I do not know that," he replied quietly, and the weight behind his voice silenced the others instantly. Clara felt that too. The authority in it, the kind that did not need to be proven. It simply existed. He looked back at her then, his gaze softer, but no less intense. "Tell me exactly what you felt when you touched me," he said, and this time it was not a command. It was something closer to a request, though it still carried that same undeniable force. Clara hesitated, her mind racing. But the truth came out before she could stop it. "Nothing at first," she said slowly. "It was just cold, like there was nothing there. And then it started, but it did not feel like a normal heartbeat. It felt like it was searching." She frowned, trying to find the right words, like it was trying to match something. His eyes darkened slightly, understanding flickering across his features. "And it found you," he murmured, almost to himself. Clara shook her head again, stepping back as far as the narrow alley would allow. "No, that is not possible. I am just me." The words sounded weaker than she wanted, because deep down she knew something about this was not ordinary, had never been ordinary. One of the men behind him spoke again, unable to stay silent. "If the synchronization is complete, then her life force is now intertwined with yours." Clara's breath caught. Life force. The words sounded unreal, like something out of a story she would have laughed at just hours ago. "That is not how real life works," she said quickly, but no one argued with her. They did not need to, because the truth was already beating inside her chest. The man stepped closer again, slow this time, deliberate, giving her the chance to move away if she wanted, but she did not. She could not with that invisible pull holding her in place. His voice lowered, just enough that it felt like it existed only between the two of them. "In my world, it is exactly how it works," he said. And there was no arrogance in it, just fact. Clara's pulse spiked, and she felt it echo immediately in him, stronger this time. Undeniable. Her eyes widened. "Stop that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not doing anything," he replied, and for the first time there was a faint edge of something else in his tone, something dangerously close to frustration, as if he was not used to things happening outside of his control. The rain began to ease, the steady downpour softening into a quiet drizzle, but the tension in the air did not lift. If anything, it grew sharper, more focused. The man turned slightly, addressing those behind him without taking his eyes off Clara. "We are not separating anything tonight," he said, and the finality in his voice left no room for argument. The others exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke. Clara felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the weather. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped fully into her space. Then, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. But this time it did not feel as lifeless as before. Now it carried something else, something that answered her. "It means," he said quietly, "that until I understand what you have become to me, you are not leaving my side." Clara's heart, or whatever it was now, hit hard against her ribs, and for the first time since this began, she realized the truth she had been avoiding. This was not something she could walk away from. This was not something she could explain or fix or pretend had not happened. Whatever connection had formed between them in that moment in the rain, it had already chosen its path, and she was now standing in the center of it. Clara's breath caught as his words settled around her like an invisible cage, not harsh, not forced, but absolute in a way she could not argue with, the kind of certainty that did not ask for permission. It simply existed. She shook her head instinctively, taking a small step back even though something inside her resisted the distance. "No," she said, her voice uneven but firm. "I have a life. I have a job. I cannot just disappear because of something I do not even understand." The man watched her without interrupting, his expression unreadable, but the connection between them reacted immediately, her pulse spiking, his answering in perfect sync, stronger, heavier, as if the bond itself refused her denial. She pressed her hand harder against her chest, frustration rising now alongside the fear. "Why does it keep doing that?" she demanded, her voice shaking despite her attempt to steady it. One of the men behind him stepped forward again, clearly struggling to stay silent. Because the bond is stabilizing, he said carefully, his eyes fixed on Clara as if she were something fragile and dangerous at the same time. The longer you remain close, the more permanent it becomes. Clara's stomach dropped. Permanent. The word echoed louder than anything else. Then I will just leave, she said quickly, turning slightly as if to prove it, as if movement alone could undo what had already been done. But before she could take more than a step, the rhythm in her chest faltered, sharp and sudden, her breath catching as a wave of dizziness hit her out of nowhere. She reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against the wall to steady herself, and in that same instant she felt it again, his presence pulling her back, grounding her, stabilizing the rhythm as if distance itself weakened her. She froze, her fingers tightening against the cold brick. What was that? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The man stepped closer, his movements careful this time, controlled, as if he was aware that even a small change could affect her now. You cannot go far, he said quietly, and there was no threat in his voice, only certainty. Not anymore. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide, searching for something that would tell her this was not real, that this was something she could wake up from. But there was nothing, only that steady, shared rhythm binding them together. That is not possible, she said again, but the words had lost their strength. Because her body had already proven otherwise, the man studied her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, a subtle shift in his composure that revealed just how unexpected this situation was for him as well. If the connection weakens when you move away, he said, more to himself now, analyzing, understanding, then proximity is no longer a choice, it is a requirement. Clara shook her head again, a quiet laugh escaping her lips, but it held no humor, only disbelief. You are talking about this like it is some kind of equation, she said. Like I am not even a person in this. His gaze sharpened slightly at that, and for a brief second something changed in his expression, something almost human. You are the only variable I cannot predict, he replied, and the honesty in his voice caught her off guard. The men behind him shifted slightly, exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was unfolding. My lord, one of them said carefully, if the bond continues to stabilize, then others will sense it soon. Clara's attention snapped back to them. Others, she repeated, the words sending a chill through her. The man did not look away from her as he answered. There are others who would consider this valuable, he said, choosing his words with precision. Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing again. Valuable how? She asked, her voice quieter now. He stepped even closer, close. Enough that the space between them felt charged with something she could not name, something deeper than fear, deeper than confusion. Because you are no longer just human, he said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just truth. Clara's heart pounded. His heart answered. And for the first time she understood the real danger. It was not just him. It was not just this bond. It was everything that came with it. Everything she had just been pulled into without warning. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving the alley quiet, still, as if the world outside had paused while hers unraveled. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself, but the realization settled deeper with every second. This was not temporary. This was not something that would fade with time. This was something that would grow, change, evolve, and she was at the center of it whether she wanted to be or not. The man watched her carefully, as if waiting for her to reach the same conclusion he already had. And when she finally looked back at him, something in her expression had shifted, not acceptance, not yet, but understanding, and that alone changed everything. Clara stood there in the quiet aftermath of the rain, her breath finally steady, but her thoughts anything but. The city around them slowly returning to life with distant car sounds and flickering lights. Yet the space between her and him felt sealed off, untouched by anything normal. She lowered her hand from her chest, though the sensation remained, constant, unrelenting, a shared rhythm she could not ignore. If I am not just human anymore, she said slowly, testing the words as if they might break if spoken too clearly, then what exactly am I supposed to be? The question hung in the air, heavier than she expected. The man did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting slightly as if searching through something far older than the moment they were in, something buried deep in memory or history. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more measured. "There has not been a case like this in over 2 centuries, he said, and the weight of time in his words made Clara's stomach tighten. 2 centuries. That was not something people said casually, not something that belonged in her world. "Then how do you know what happens next?" she asked, her voice softer now, less defensive, more uncertain. He looked back at her, and for a moment there was something almost human in his expression, something that did not belong to a king or something ancient, but to someone facing the unknown. "I do not," he admitted, and the honesty in that answer unsettled her more than anything else had so far, because if he did not know, then no one did. One of the men behind him stepped forward again, unable to hide his concern this time. "My lord, we cannot remain here. This location is exposed, and if others sense the bond forming." He did not finish the sentence, but Clara did not need him to. The implication was clear enough. She wrapped her arms slightly around herself, not from cold, but from the growing awareness that whatever this was, it was bigger than just her and him, far bigger. "You said others would consider this valuable," she said, looking directly at him now, forcing herself to stay steady under his gaze. "Does that mean they would come looking for me?" The man did not look away, did not soften the truth. "Yes," he said simply, and there was no hesitation in it. Clara exhaled slowly, her mind racing through everything she knew, everything she did not know, and realizing how little control she actually had in this situation. "Then I do not have a choice," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. But he heard it. Of course he did. His head tilted slightly. "Choice is still yours," he replied, "but consequences not." Clara let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. But again, there was no humor in it. "That sounds like the same thing," she said, and for the first time, something in his expression shifted into something almost resembling agreement. The men behind him began to move subtly, repositioning, preparing without needing to be told. The vehicles still waiting, engines low and quiet. "Ready." The man extended his hand then, not forcefully, not demanding, simply offering. The gesture alone carried more weight than any command he had given so far. "Come with me," he said, his voice calm, steady. "Until we understand this, you will be safer where I can control what happens next." Clara stared at his hand for a long second, her heart, or whatever it was now, beating in that shared rhythm that refused to let her pretend this was not real. She thought about her apartment, her job, the life she had just hours ago believed was complicated, difficult, but still hers. And then she looked back at him, at the impossible reality standing in front of her, at the connection she could feel every time she tried to deny it. And she knew that life was already gone, whether she accepted it or not. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a subtle shock through her, not painful, but undeniable, like confirmation. The rhythm between them strengthened instantly, stabilizing in a way that made her breath catch. His hand closed around hers gently, but firmly enough that she knew this was not something temporary, not something she could undo later. The world seemed to narrow in that moment, everything else fading into the background. The city, the rain, the life she had known, all of it slipping further away as she stepped forward, choosing something she did not understand because it had already chosen her first. And as the car door opened beside them, and she moved closer without resisting, one thought settled quietly, but deeply in her mind. Whatever she had become tonight, it was only the beginning. The car door closed with a soft, final sound that echoed louder in Clara's mind than it should have, sealing her into a space that felt both silent and impossibly controlled. The interior was dark but not unwelcoming. Leather seats, subtle lighting, everything precise, everything intentional. She sat stiffly at first, her hands resting in her lap, as if any sudden movement might disrupt whatever fragile balance now existed between her and the man beside her. He sat across from her, not touching, not speaking, yet his presence filled the space completely, like gravity, like something constant that did not need to announce itself. The moment the car began to move, smooth and almost soundless, Clara felt it again, that shift inside her, the rhythm stabilizing further, deeper, as if distance from the alley had allowed something else to take hold. She inhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice quieter than before, not out of fear, but out of the realization that she was no longer in control of the direction her life was taking. He did not answer immediately. His gaze focused on her in a way that felt less like observation now and more like assessment, careful, deliberate, as if he was learning her in real time. "Now," he said finally, "we determine what this bond will become." Clara frowned slightly, the words settling uneasily in her mind. "What it will become," she repeated. "You say that like it can change." He tilted his head just slightly. Considering her question, "All bonds evolve," he said. "The question is whether this one strengthens or collapses." Clara's chest tightened at that, the word collapse carrying more weight than she wanted to admit. "And if it collapses?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He held her gaze, unflinching. "Then one of us will not survive it," he said calmly, not as a threat, not as something meant to scare her, but as a simple truth. Clara's breath caught, her fingers curling slightly against her knees, her mind racing to process what he had just said. She shook her head, instinctively rejecting it. "No," she said quickly. That cannot be how this works." But even as she said it, her body betrayed her, the rhythm in her chest tightening, reacting to the possibility as if it understood something her mind refused to accept. The man watched her closely, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes sharpened, as if her reaction had confirmed something important. "You feel it," he said quietly. Clara looked up at him, confusion and frustration mixing in her expression. "Feel what?" she demanded. He leaned slightly forward, just enough to close some of the distance between them. "The bond responding to your denial," he said, and the moment the words left his mouth, she realized he was right. The more she tried to reject it, the more unstable the rhythm became, uneven, strained, until she forced herself to take a slow breath and stop fighting it. And just like that, it steadied again, smooth, synchronized, undeniable. Her shoulders dropped slightly as the tension eased, but the realization settled deeper, heavier. She was not just connected to him. She was affected by him, influenced in ways she did not understand. "This is insane," she whispered, staring down at her hands as if they might hold some answer. The car turned smoothly, the city lights shifting outside the tinted windows, moving farther away from anything familiar. "To you," he said calmly. "It is new. To me, it is unprecedented." Clara let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "That does not make it better," she said. He did not argue, did not try to convince her otherwise. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving her space, though the connection between them remained constant, unaffected by physical distance now. "You will stay where I can monitor this," he continued, his tone returning to something more structured, more controlled, "until we understand the limits, the risks, and what it requires to stabilize." Clara lifted her gaze again, meeting his eyes directly. "And if I say no?" she asked, testing the boundary, testing whether she had any control left at all. There was a pause, brief but deliberate, before he answered. "Then you will feel the consequences of distance," he said, not unkindly, but without hesitation. Clara swallowed, remembering the sudden weakness she had felt earlier, the way her body had reacted when she tried to walk away, and she knew he was not exaggerating. Silence settled between them again, but this time it was different, not heavy, not uncertain, but filled with an understanding that neither of them had chosen this, yet both were now bound by it. The car slowed slightly, turning onto a road that felt quieter, more isolated, the city fading further into the distance. Clara leaned back against the seat, her mind still racing but her body slowly adjusting to the rhythm that no longer felt entirely foreign. And as she closed her eyes for just a second, trying to process everything that had changed in the span of a single night, one thought lingered, steady and unavoidable. Whatever this bond demanded from her, she was already beginning to become part of it. The car slowed to a near-silent stop, and before Clara could gather her thoughts, the door beside her opened smoothly from the outside. Cool night air slipping in like a quiet invitation. She hesitated for only a second before stepping out, her shoes touching polished stone instead of wet pavement. the shift so sudden it made her pause. The world around her no longer smelled like rain and city smoke, but something cleaner, colder, controlled. She looked up and her breath caught. The building in front of her rose like something out of another time. All dark stone and tall glass, modern yet ancient at the same time. Lights glowing softly behind massive windows. Every detail precise, intentional, unreachable. She turned slightly, instinctively looking for something familiar. But there was nothing, no crowded streets, no noise, just silence and the faint hum of something distant. The man stepped out beside her, his presence grounding that strange, steady rhythm inside her again, stronger. Now, more stable, as if this place itself supported whatever connection bound them. "Where are we?" she asked quietly, her voice almost echoing in the stillness. He glanced at the building briefly before looking back at her. "Somewhere you will not be found unless I allow it," he said, his tone calm, not threatening, just factual. Clara wrapped her arms lightly around herself, not from cold, but from the growing awareness that her world had narrowed to this, to him, to whatever existed beyond. Those doors, the men who had followed them moved quickly, efficiently, opening the entrance without hesitation, stepping aside the moment he approached. Clara noticed it now, the way they never questioned him, never hesitated, as if his presence alone was enough to command everything around him. She swallowed, stepping forward slowly, the doors closing behind her with a quiet finality that made her chest tighten again. The interior was just as controlled as the outside, clean lines, dark surfaces, soft lighting that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her footsteps sounded too loud against the floor, each one reminding her how out of place she was here. He walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, but exactly in step, as if the distance between them had been measured and decided long before she arrived. "You will stay here," he said, breaking the silence. Clara looked at him quickly. "For how long?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than she intended. He did not hesitate. "Until the bond no longer threatens your life." Clara's chest tightened again at the word threatens. She stopped walking for a moment, forcing him to stop with her. "You keep saying that like it is guaranteed," she said, her voice steady but strained, like something is already going wrong. He turned slightly to face her, and for a brief second, something shifted in his expression, something more serious, more focused. "Because it is," he said quietly, and the honesty in his voice made it impossible to dismiss. Clara felt the rhythm between them react again, not unstable this time, but heavier, as if it understood the gravity of what he was saying. "This bond," he continued, "it was not formed by ritual, not by intention, it was forced into existence by circumstance." Clara frowned, trying to follow. "And that makes it dangerous," she finished for him. He nodded once, a small, precise movement. "Unpredictable," he corrected. Clara exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting around the space again, searching for something she could hold on to, something normal, but there was nothing. Only this, only him, only the connection she could not escape. "And you think keeping me here fixes that?" she asked. He studied her for a moment before answering. "No," he said, "but it gives me control over what happens next." Clara let out a quiet breath, almost a surrender, though she did not fully realize it yet. The men who had followed them had already moved ahead, preparing something she could not see, doors opening, lights adjusting, everything moving around him like he was the center of it all, and she was now part of that center whether she wanted to be or not. He gestured slightly, guiding her forward again, and this time she followed without resisting, her steps slower, more deliberate, the rhythm inside her steady, constant, impossible to ignore. As they moved deeper into the building, away from the outside world, away from anything familiar, Clara realized something she had not allowed herself to think before. This was not just a place she would stay. This was a place that would change her, shape her, reveal something about her she did not yet understand. And as the door behind them closed once more, sealing her further into this new reality, the quiet truth settled deeper inside her mind. She had not just stepped into his world, she had already become part of it. The deeper Clara walked into the building, the quieter everything became, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of unpredictability, like every inch of this place had been designed to eliminate chaos. Her footsteps softened against the polished floor, her breathing slowly matching the steady rhythm inside her chest. That same rhythm that no longer felt entirely foreign, just unfamiliar in a way she was beginning to understand. The man stopped in front of a tall door, dark and seamless. Against the wall, it opened without a sound before he even touched it. As if the building itself responded to him, Clara hesitated at the threshold, her eyes scanning the space beyond. The room was large, minimal, everything precise: a bed, a seating area, tall windows that revealed nothing but darkness outside. It felt less like a room and more like a controlled environment. "This is where you will stay," he said, his voice calm. Clara stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface of a nearby table, cool, smooth, untouched. "You say that like I am not allowed to leave," she said, not accusing, just stating what she was beginning to understand. He stepped in behind her, the door closing quietly, sealing the space. "You are allowed," he replied. "But your body will not cooperate with that decision." Clara turned to face him, crossing her arms instinctively. "So it is not really a choice," she said. He did not argue, did not correct her. The silence between them stretched for a moment before he spoke again. "The bond is stabilizing faster than expected," he said, and this time there was a slight shift in his tone, something more focused, more analytical. Clara frowned slightly. "That does not sound like a bad thing," she said. He looked at her directly. "It depends on what it is stabilizing into." Clara's chest tightened again, the rhythm steady but heavier, like it carried meaning she could not fully grasp yet. "You keep saying things like that," she said, her voice quieter now. "Like there is something you are not telling me." He held her gaze for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he stepped closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough that she could feel the shift in the connection between them. Stronger, clearer. "There are different types of bonds," he said. "Some are temporary, some are controlled, and some—" He paused briefly, his eyes narrowing slightly as if the word itself carried weight. "Some become permanent." Clara's breath caught. "Permanent," she repeated, the words settling deeper than she wanted. He nodded once. "If this becomes that kind of bond, then it will not simply connect us, it will redefine you." Clara stared at him, her mind racing. "Redefine me how?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead his gaze shifted briefly to her chest, as if he could see the rhythm she felt so clearly. "Your body is already adapting," he said. "Your pulse is no longer entirely human. Your reactions are beginning to align with mine." Clara shook her head, stepping back slightly. "No," she said quickly. "I do not feel different." But even as she said it, she knew that was not entirely true. She had felt it. The way her body responded to distance, the way her heartbeat synced with his without effort, the way everything inside her seemed to adjust when he was near. He watched her carefully, not challenging her words, just observing. "You will," he said quietly, and there was no doubt in his voice. Clara exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting to the window, the darkness outside reflecting faintly back at her, her own reflection unfamiliar in ways she could not explain. "And if I do not want that?" she asked softly, more to herself than to him. He answered anyway. "Then the bond will force a choice," he said. Clara turned back to him, her expression tightening. "What kind of choice?" she asked, her voice barely steady. He stepped closer again, just enough that the connection between them sharpened. "Undeniable. To complete. Or to break," he said. Clara's breath caught. "And breaking it," she began, already knowing the answer before he said it, "comes at a cost," he finished, his voice calm, but the weight behind it impossible to ignore. Silence filled the room again, heavier now, filled with understanding neither of them could avoid. Clara looked down at her hands, then slowly back up at him, and for the first time since this began, her fear shifted into something else, something more focused, more aware. "Then we need to figure out what this is becoming," she said, her voice steadier now. He held her gaze, and this time, there was no hesitation in his response. "We will," he said, and the certainty in his voice made it clear, whatever this bond was turning into, it had already begun shaping both of them. Clara stood still in the quiet room, the weight of everything settling into something sharper, more defined, no longer just confusion or fear, but awareness, The kind that changes how a person breathes, how they think, how they exist in the next moment. Her hand moved slowly to her chest again, not out of panic this time, but intention, feeling that steady rhythm, strong, unwavering, shared. She closed her eyes briefly, focusing on it. And for the first time, she did not fight it. She let it be. Let it settle. Let it exist without resistance. And the moment she did, something shifted, subtle but undeniable. The connection between them grew clearer, quieter, more stable, as if it had been waiting for her to stop pushing against it. She opened her eyes again, her gaze lifting to meet his. And this time, there was something different in her expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but understanding that resisting this would only make it worse. It reacts to me, she said quietly, her voice steady now. He nodded once, his eyes focused on her with that same careful intensity. And you react to it, he replied. Clara exhaled slowly, lowering her hand. Then it is not just something happening to me, she said. It is something I am part of. The words felt strange but true, and the moment they settled, the rhythm between them responded again, not sharper, not heavier, but smoother, aligned. As if acknowledging the shift in her understanding, he stepped slightly closer, just enough, that the space between them no longer felt uncertain. That is the first step, he said. Quietly, Clara tilted her head slightly. First step toward what? She asked. He did not answer immediately, his gaze holding hers, searching, measuring, as if trying to determine something that could not be explained easily. Control, he said finally. Clara let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, but this time there was a trace of something else in it, something steadier. You say that like it is possible, she said. He did not look away. It is, he replied, but not without cost. Clara's expression softened slightly, not from comfort, but from clarity. She understood that now. Everything about this had a cost. Every choice, every reaction, every moment she decided to accept or resist what was happening. She turned slightly, walking a few steps toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She studied it for a moment, searching for something different, something changed, but on the surface, she still looked like herself, and yet she knew that was no longer true. Not completely. If this becomes permanent, she said slowly, her eyes still on her reflection, then I am not just connected to you. She turned back to face him. I become part of your world. He did not deny it, did not soften it. Yes, he said simply. Clara nodded once, a small, deliberate movement, as if confirming something to herself more than to him. Then I need to understand everything, she said, her voice steady, grounded in a way it had not been before. Not just what this is, but what it means, what it changes, what I am becoming. The room seemed to still around her words, the air tightening slightly, as if the decision itself had weight. He watched her closely, and for the first time since this began, there was something unmistakable in his expression, not uncertainty, not calculation, but recognition, as if she had reached a point he had been waiting for. You will, he said, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. Clara took a slow breath, feeling that shared rhythm once more, steady, controlled, no longer overwhelming, just present, constant, a reminder that this was real, that this was happening, that this was not something she could walk away from. She lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again, stronger this time, clearer. And if I learn to control it, she said, her voice quieter now, but more certain, then it does not control me. He stepped closer, just enough that the connection between them sharpened again, not unstable, but powerful, grounded. That depends, he said, Clara's brow furrowed slightly. On what? She asked. He held her gaze, and this time there was something deeper in his voice, something that carried more than just knowledge. On whether this bond was meant to give you power, he said, or to change you into something else entirely. Clara's breath stilled for a moment, the words settling into her in a way she could not ignore, and for the first time, the question was no longer just about survival, or escape, or understanding. It was about transformation, about what she might become if this continued. And as the silence returned, not heavy, not uncertain, but filled with something new, something inevitable, Clara realized one final truth, quiet but absolute. She had not just given something away that night, she had stepped into something that would decide who she would become next.